Good morning, everyone. Today is Friday, January 22nd. It's 10:02 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I welcome everyone to the hearings of the International Commission of Inquiry on Systemic Racist Police Violence against People of African Descent in the United States. These hearings are a process by which witnesses can present accounts of the unjustified killings and maimings of Black people by police officers in the United States before an international panel of human rights experts. We now begin in the hearing in the case of Ramarley Graham. My name is Ria Julien, and I am the rapporteur for this hearing. Presiding over the hearing today is Max Boqwana of South Africa, and Commissioner Max Boqwana, that is, and Commissioner Peter Herbert of the UK and Kenya. The witnesses for this hearing are the attorney for Mr. Graham, the estate of Mr. Graham, that's Russell Royce, as well as a family member, Constance Graham, the mother of Ramarley Graham. There will be 50 minutes for this hearing. Witnesses will testify, followed by a period of questions from commissioners. I will call time at the 30-minute mark and the 45-minute mark. Please excuse my interruptions. Commissioners Boqwana and Herbert, I now present to you your first witness, and I believe that is Attorney Russell Royce of the Russell Emden firm. I will now swear the witness. Mr. Russell Royce, please confirm your name.
I confirm my name, and just for the record, it is Royce Russell.
Pardon me, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Royce Russell, you've confirmed your name. Thank you very much, and please forgive my error. Do you promise that your testimony to the Commission of Inquiry will be true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
You may begin. Commissioners Boqwana and Herbert, I now present to you Royce Russell. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Ria.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me here. Just following some of the procedures and protocols, I'll give the swift version of what led to the death of Ramarley Graham, if that is okay, and it may please the council. I am the attorney Royce Russell, who represented Constance Malcolm and the family of Ramarley Graham, who was wrongfully killed back in February of 2012. I am the sole practitioner partner of the firm Royce Russell R Square ESQ PLLC. Tragic place within 18-year-old Ramarley Graham's household. The facts are pretty simple. The facts surround itself around racial profiling, implicit bias, and stereotypes at the highest level, which appears not to be something that the New York City Police Department can fed out or train or do away with. It will always be there, unfortunately. And this is a prime example of such. Briefly, Mr. Graham was with friends, hanging out as any normal teenager would. And they went from one location of a store to another location, another friend's house, for which then Mr. Graham went to his house. Unbeknownst to Mr. Graham, the police were surveying some other activity, had nothing to do with him, but fixated on him for some reason. That reason was never articulated. We've never found the truth. We know what the lies were, but the truth was missing so far and so fast. The lies were one that he was selling drugs or doing something nefarious, but there was no proof whatsoever to support that. Nonetheless, Mr. Graham, as any other teenager would, after convening with his friends, went to his house. And upon arriving to his house, he went upstairs to meet his grandmother and his brother. Unbeknownst to him, police were running after or running behind him, and with all the vigor and violence that you can ever mentally think of, tried to knock down the two-family house door. And being unsuccessful, tried every means necessary to get inside that house. Their narrative, false narrative, was that Mr. Graham was seen with a gun. And so therefore they needed to stop him. And I'll double back on how false a narrative that was. But eventually, by way of a neighbor, they were able to get in through the side entrance of the door without having any tactical plan, without following any protocol and procedures of calling emergency service units, which are units that come in to deal with someone that you may think have a weapon that's inside a home where other people may be there. They disregarded all the protocols whatsoever. And their main focus was to make sure that they get inside that house and get to Mr. Graham. Forget protocol. And upon entering, they ravages the first floor apartment, not really understanding the structure of the two-family house. And then they break into the home of Ramarley Graham as he stood there with his grandmother by his side and his little brother by his side. Guns pointed, guns drawn. And Ramarley Graham moved slightly to the left towards the bathroom, and that's all he had to do. And that was the last step that he took, because he was shot dead right there in front of his grandmother and his little brother by his side. Now, the false narratives run wild after that. And the false narratives begin with the NYPD releasing video. So it's not only that Ramarley Graham was killed physically, they had assassinated his character and his person by releasing video of some other individual running in all white and running as if he has done something wrong. Meanwhile, Ramarley Graham had all black on. So the first thing was to set and bring out a narrative, and this is systemic. This is how it goes on throughout history, is to what I call get to first base first. Damn the truth. Let me get there and let me put out the narrative that I want the world to see, which is unfair and biased and doesn't even give time to allow anyone to get to the truth of what happened. But in the traditional way that NYPD does, they release the narrative that Ramarley Graham was under surveillance, he was selling drugs, and they showed the footage of an individual running who had all white, unbeknownst to the police department. And thank God for the owners of the house, Mrs. Graham, Mrs. Constance, rather Mrs. Malcolm. We call her Connie, so I'm gonna stay as Connie because I see her here. Connie had the forethought to have a camera in front of her door as security. And it showed that Ramarley Graham had all black. So hence, first strike for the false narrative, him running in white. Secondly, it shows that Ramarley Graham was walking to the front of his door. Second strike of false narrative. You would think if someone was being chased by the police and they knew about it, they would be running, which falls into line by his physical display that he did not know police were following him, and he had no reason to act any differently but to go home like he normally does to meet up with his family. And then the third false narrative, which is the biggest, is that there was never any gun found. There was nothing of anything that was of illegal contraband that was worth noting. And because an officer, and I'll use this and cite me on the air quotes, feared for their safety, air quotes, this young man was killed. And this is where the dog is chasing the tail. You illegally enter their apartment. Your factual basis is false and led upon implicit bias, false narrative, stereotypes. You then enter their home, his home, and now you fear for your safety. A reasonable person would say that if you saw and if you thought the person on the other side had a gun, you would do everything you can to keep that person in that room and limit their exposure, contain and isolate. And if you thought that someone else was in danger, then you immediately call emergency service units, which they did not do. So if that wasn't enough, you then have to live with the false narrative. And then you add insult to injury in that it took over 5 years to have police officer Hayes then fired. 5 years of litigation to have the person that took a life unjustly fired. And so when the commission hears me today, there are a couple of things that is striking and that is of issue and of problems. One, the marriage between the district attorney's office and police departments and the political connections between the police department and government, the mayor. And the fact that in New York City, it doesn't matter what anyone says, the district attorney's office, the mayor, because the police control themselves. At the end of the day, they make the determination whether or not someone is terminated or not. There could be hearings all day and all night. The commissioner has to sign off on it. And if the commissioner does not sign off on it, then the person is not terminated. So what happens is that you have to have this outside pressure. You have to have the vigilance of Connie and other entities such as Justice Committee, Gathering for Justice, National Action Network, Until Freedom, CPU, all the advocacy organizations. You have to lift and hold up the victims of wrongful death and police brutality, because if you stay silent, the political entities in and of itself will not do anything about it, especially in an era where we know that there are sympathizers that wear the uniform of law enforcement. We've seen that with the insurrection in the Capitol, and that's where we've seen it at its highest. But as an individual, African-American male representing people of color in the area of civil rights, false arrest, and police brutality, we've been shouting that from day one, that there are people that are on the force that are racially, or let's say racist, and have racial motivations that is hidden behind their badge. And we see it play out, and we saw it play out with the death of Ramarley Graham. And so, one of the biggest obstacles that we face here in New York City is the 50A law, which prevented, and now has been reformed, prevented the release of police officers' past history. And when I say past history, how many cases have they been cited for excessive force, false arrest, police brutality, and the city had to pay either by way of settlement or by way of judgment? And so the mayor has done what I call a so-so job in reforming that statute. So now that could become public. But that's only part of the battle. The real battle is that now we have what their history is. And any good employer would say, well, if my employee keeps on coming to work late and the job is not getting done, then they should be terminated. We do not have that here in New York City. Officers that I am litigating against now, cases that I have now, you have officers with 4, 5, 6 cases pending, settlements, 75,000, 150,000, 250,000 because of their actions. And they remain on the police force, or they get transferred, or they go to another county and they become a police officer there. But they never are terminated. So, we welcome the fact that the 50A is now in effect where we can get information as to the background of police officers. But we know that that's not enough, because what we really need is the body cam footage that police officers are now required to wear. And so that's the next battle, is who determines when that footage is turned on? And when is it released? How long do we have to wait for it? Currently, in the matter of Kowalski Trawick, a young man that, once again, in his home, police enter illegally and they shoot him and he's dead. We had to wait months, weeks, at least a year to get the body footage to see how the African-American, more experienced officer told his white, younger, experienced officer of 4 years, where he had 16 years, do not shoot. We're not going to tase him. Put the gun away. But does he listen? No, he does not. What happens? Kowalski Trawick is dead. Why so? Why do you enter this man's home again? And if you believe he was a threat, why didn't you just leave? Or why didn't you call emergency service unit? That is the question. Where is the retraining? Where is the psychological evaluation? Where is the cultural sensitivity? Where are the elements of what I call accountability? Legislation that says maybe if a police officer is involved in a wrongful shooting or wrongful death, that they have to pay a percentage of what the compensation to the family may be. Some would say that that would have a chilling effect on law enforcement. I say it would have the right effect on law enforcement. Have you think before you act. Think about all the consequences. Maybe that will empower the officer that stands there and watch the abuse go on and watch the forced arrest go on. Take a moment to intervene, because I'm of the mindset that it's not only the bad actor that does it himself that is accountable and responsible. It is the officer that stands to the side and does nothing while the action is taking place. And I'll just say one last thing, because I want time for all to speak and have all the questions we can. If we just leave it at the footstep of the police in the United States of America to reform themselves, then we'll never get reform. It will never happen. And part of what we need to be doing is teaching and educating and making sure that our community is informed on how to deal with police encounters, how to deal with unlawful stops. What are the things that you can do that will preserve evidence when you're dead, or when someone is bringing a false narrative that can help your attorney vindicate and get you some type of redress and justice, and also be used in a forum like this so that we can have true reform. So I think that's part of the mission as we move forward. That's part of the think tank, is the education part to everyone in our community and communities of color, no matter what age, on how to handle unlawful police stops. As you see in the backdrop, you see cardiac arrest. That's a book I authored. It deals with tactical guides on how to handle unlawful police stops. But it is important because relying on the police themselves and law enforcement themselves, I will tell you, it is a dead end. We have to empower ourselves as we walk this walk. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. And I would like now to begin with our second witness, Commissioners Boqwana and Herbert. I now present to you the second witness, that's Constance Graham. Ms. Graham, Constance Graham, please confirm your name.
My name is actually Constance Malcolm.
It is, okay, all right. I'm 0 for 2 so far today. So Ms. Malcolm, do you promise that your testimony to the Commission of Inquiry will be true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you. You may begin.
Okay, again, my name is Constance Malcolm, the mother of Ramarley Graham. Ramarley Graham was killed February 2nd, 2012 in our home in the Bronx where we used to reside. Like Mr. Russell said, you know, they broke into the home. At the time, my son, he was 6 years old. And my mom, they had just came home from school, him getting undressed to do his homework and stuff when the cops broke in. He had to really watch his brother got killed in front of him at 6 years old, where no child should have to see that. And after that happened, they took my mom, which is the grandmother of Ramarley, to the precinct and held her there for 7 hours, questioning her, interrogating her. Even when Mr. Russell came to the precinct, they mocked and they jeer and they carry on, or she's not there. They don't know where she at. They don't know what he's talking about. And these are the things we as family has to go through when we lose our loved one. We can't get any answer. We get to run around. Ramarley body was lost for 4 days. And I don't understand how a body could be lost for 4 days when the grandmother clearly told you who lives in the apartment and gave you all the names. Why did you put my son under a wrong name? So it took the House Speaker, Carl Hassan of New York, to find his body after 4 days. Like Mr. Russell said, there was a lot of lies that was told. One of the lies that was told that he struggled with the officer, and that's why he got shot. Again, like Mr. Russell said, he was no gun found. There was never a gun. It was also about 3 cameras that shows Ramarley walking home. One from the bodega where he stops, one when he turned the corner on another house down the block, and the one from the house where I reside, which it was my house. The landlord that owned the house had her cameras there. I didn't put them there for any reason. The landlord put it there because everybody in the house worked, so she wanted to secure her property. After that, it took months, years of me fighting. Richard Hayes was charged with manslaughter 1 and manslaughter 2, which the case was thrown on a technicality. We had to fight again to get NYPD department trial, where they charge him with several, reckless endangerment and stuff like that. He was found guilty. The problem with that, he was found guilty, but he didn't serve a day in jail because they told him he was going to get, the judge recommended for him to be fired. So he went on his day off on a Sunday and went and resigned. So technically, he was never fired. He could go on to another job as police officer, get hired as a police officer, because he was never fired. But what I made sure I did, I fought like hell to make sure he was off the force. He would never carry a gun again, and he would never get a good guy letter to go to another department. So those are the things I had to fight for. And also Mr. Russell talked about the 50A law, which is a secrecy law that backed the officer on in the job where if they had any discipline before, it wouldn't come out. We wouldn't be able to get those information. It was several family members. I'm one of the lead family member on that campaign, which we did got that passed, and it's going to be in law pretty soon. Well, the NYPD is actually taking us back to court for that because, for what reason they trying to hide these officer behavior on the job, and it shouldn't be because you're a public servant. Why we can't know who's in our community, who are working in our community, what are they doing, what are they backgrounds? And that's when I say background, I mean their record on the job. We are not asking for any record where they live or anything, just the record that's on the job where they perform. Another thing that I was campaigning on was also the special prosecutor, which we got that passed also. I'm a leading person as family on that law also. We got that passed this summer. And also the Police Data Stop Act, we got that passed also. A lot of things we got passed this summer due to also the uprise in the country when George Floyd happened. Because some of these laws we've been fighting for and we couldn't get it passed, but because of the uproar, along with the advocacy and us as family on the front line fighting, it has nothing to do with our cases anymore. We fighting for the next Black and brown boys and girls that the family have to go through the same thing that we went through, just to get answers. It took me 6 years fighting just to get basic information. I had to file a FOIA request, which is, a freedom of information to get information of what happened in my son's case. And Richard Hayes that murdered my son, he had 6 prior CCRB complaints against him and 10 allegations. One of them is just 15 months prior before he killed my son. So with the 50A law, if these things was on the books where people could find out what the discipline of this police officer, I believe my son would be here today. He might be beaten, battered up a little bit, but he would be still here. And it takes me so long. The system, all it do is beat us down. And some of us can't fight because we don't have the people to support us. Sometimes we don't even have family members to support us. But for me, I knew I had to fight for my son. I was the voice for him. I had to be his voice because all the lies that was told and been told, even today, 8 years later, you ask anybody about Ramarley case, the first thing they said is, oh, the young boy that was running And I'm like, no, my son was running. Like Mr. Russell said, they have video that they even put out and try to say it was my son. This is how far the NYPD will go, you know, to demonize people that has been killed. They go as far as even go and seal records and release these records, and nobody is held accountable. Officer that murdered loved ones, they go on to be promoted. To me, you are being promoted to kill a Black man or woman. That's a crime. And this is what we see in this country. Law enforcement is never being held accountable for their actions. They either leave the job or, you know, like I said, they get promoted. While we as families sit back and have to, you know, run around doing protests and trying to get law passed just to get basic answer to what happened to our loved one. Ramarley was 18. I would never know what my son would have became. Could they rob me of that? They took that away from me. My son, Chinar Campbell, he was 6 years old when he watched his brother murdered in front of him. He watched police officer curse at his grandmother and tell her they're going to shoot her if she don't shut up when she started questioning what happened to her grandson. My son, I say he's damaged because I don't know. He's 15 now. Chinar is 15 now. I don't know what will happen if an officer try to stop him and what the outcome going to be. My scare is I might have to go bury another young Black man because of what he saw happen to his brother. And he doesn't know how to articulate or how to respond to an officer. That's, we teach our kids, you're supposed to respect and follow rules, you know, whenever they tell you to do something. But we know oftentimes they do follow these rules and they end up dead. Ramarley was in his home where it's supposed to be a sacred place and he was supposed to be safe, but that never happened. His life was snuffed right in front of his sibling face, his grandmother. And this officer was allowed to resign without any consequence. So thank you for having this hearing today, you know, on how Black and brown people has been treated in this country, and to include my son, because I think this case is really a case that people really needs to know about and what happened, or the lies that was told, you know, all the fight I had to fight just to get answers. I'm a person, I was born in Jamaica. I was not born here. When you come to this country, you hear about the land and freedom and all these things you hear about when you're in your country. And I came in when I was 13 years old. I never thought I was going to be a mom that buried her child. I never expected that. I was expecting them to bury me first. And this is something I struggle with every day because, like I said, family don't have people to back them sometimes, and they get broken down. And for me, I have been diagnosed with PTSD and also some depression because, you know, for me, I never got closure. I never got any closure because I've been on the front line fighting just to clear my son's name and get some kind of answer to what happened. So I thank you today for having, you know, to hearing me out, and hopefully change comes. I know it takes a while, but I'm being optimistic that one day change will come and we as Black people will be treated equally. So thank you.
Malcolm. I will now turn it over to the commissioners for questions. It is 10:32. We are at the 30-minute mark and we have 20 minutes for questions.
Thank you. Can I thank Ms. Malcolm for her deeply moving and very, very distressing testimony, and condolences obviously to her and her family, her younger son, and her son's grandmother. In listening to this, can I just start and ask a question, if that's all right, fellow Commissioner Max, to Royce Russell? there was an earlier contributor who made between the slave states of the South and the way they dealt with police violence and killings, and the northern states. And so far, I really haven't seen any difference. That was the first point I wanted to ask for a sort of historical perspective. And the second is this. We've all seen pictures of Mayor de Blasio, all the previous mayors of New York and their pretension at anti-racism and inclusivity when they need votes. And I just wondered, what assistance did they ever give? And I'm old enough to remember Tawana Brawley. I was in New York with many of the activists at that time, the Reverend Al Sharpton. And I just wondered, since this killing in 2012, what actually have the mayors of New York, the elected representatives of all New Yorkers, done to assist in cases like this? Thank you.
So I can use the whole 20 minutes just talking about that, right? And their fake handshakes and hugs and voices of empathy and sincerity for the moment and not for the movement. And what I mean by that is that when we had rallies, when we had protests, when we gathered in front of Mrs. Malcolm's home, when we marched the streets, they were there. They even wanted to, they shared the mic. And it was during the time that it was a mayoral race, I believe. You had plenty of candidates come and take the microphone and say all the things that they will ensure and that they will do, and they, you know, arms wrapped around you and they're hugging you. You know, I've seen this movie before, but Mrs. Malcolm did not. And, you know, part of being an attorney is to walk with your client from beginning to end and educate them over and over, like, watch what you see, watch what is being said, because the reality is that Mrs. Malcolm and other families are vulnerable at that time to think that change is going to come, and it doesn't come. This is the same mayor that took the next 4 years to even agree to make a statement to terminate haste, as he stood in front of Mrs. Malcolm's home with his arm wrapped around her with the microphone in his hand, talking about how tragic this is. The case of Ramarley Graham, for better or for worse, got lost in the space and the face of Trayvon Martin, but it shouldn't. You know, many cases that go national are not cases from New York City. They're cases from other places. And when you look at what happens in New York City, the stories get buried. And it is up to the media to keep these stories alive. And we can go down who controls what as far as media is concerned, but that is what needs to happen. The political pundits are never in your corner, and they weren't in our corner. And as Mrs. Malcolm just said, we've just received some penetration as far as the reform of 50A. And that's why it's important for those out there to understand that they're never going to walk with you from beginning to end, because their motives are not genuine to what actually happens to you. And let me just add one other thing. Richard Hayes didn't stop there. He tried to get another police law enforcement job in another county along the borders of New York. And if it wasn't for the vigilance of people in the community that sought him out, that saw his name and informed that sheriff department or that county or wherever it was, some law enforcement agency, to say, you have a bad apple, he would have a law enforcement job today.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Max. Over to you.
Peter, thank you very much. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, we can hear you.
No. Thanks. And
I can't hear him.
Max, your voice just went.
I just wanted to say to Constance, I suggest you proceed. There's a difficulty with my connection. Let me try and sort that out.
Okay, Max, I hear you. Okay, let me proceed then. I just wanted to also inquire from Ms. Malcolm. We had, and just to share the case of the Brazilian John Charles Menezes, and something that Royce Russell mentioned, the lying about that initial narrative seems to be something which white societies do all over the Western world. They said that after the 7 bombing, terrorist bombing in London in July, some years ago, 2007, that the Brazilian looked like the bomber. He looked nothing like the bomber. And they also said, the police issued statements saying he was running into the underground in London, that he wore a padded jacket, that he acted suspiciously, he jumped the barrier. All of those statements, all three, were demonstrably lies. And they persisted for approximately 18 months until the Metropolitan Police actually belatedly announced what the true version was. He did not run. He was not wearing a padded jacket. He did not in any way look suspicious. And that he certainly didn't jump any barrier into the underground station. And yet he was executed in very similar circumstances. And I just wanted to ask of Ms. Malcolm in a sense, in terms of other families who I know in New York have suffered similar tragedies, are you linked together? And I've heard that in the webinar there are victims' families who work together. And have you managed to get any support from fellow mums, dads who've had their loved ones killed in such tragic circumstances? And if so, how has that, to some extent, eased the pain that you clearly suffer?
Yes, actually we do. Unfortunately, we do have a club that we belongs to, which is oftentimes it's too big right now. It's too big. But yes, we have a family support. We work with organizations called Justice Committee. They've been around for a while. So we have a group of mothers and sister, because it's not just mothers fighting. You have sisters, you have brothers, you have nieces, you have cousins that, the family actually can't be on the front line. So they have to be the voice for these families. So yes, we do have a whole bunch of mothers, Eric Garner mother, Sean Bell, Miss Ba, it's so much name I could go on. It would take the whole day for this webinar. So yes, we do have a family, and we do usually get together once a year, like on a retreat, but unfortunately that won't happen this year because of the pandemic. But we do get together and we talk a lot on the phone, and we still have like meetings that we do. We still strategize on how we're going to change, this this police killing that's going on, and how we're going to get law passed. So yes, we do have a base of family that I work with, and we are, that's our family. That's our new family.
And just a quick follow-up, but based on your roots, did the Jamaican High Commission or the Jamaican government help at all? Because that actually, you're shaking your head. That's our similar experience in the United Kingdom, where there's a big Jamaican community. And I think one of the things that we're anxious to do is to lobby the governments in the Caribbean and in the diaspora to actually pull their finger out and protect our citizens. Because if these people were were Norwegian or from Russia, the government of America would get to know about it. I just wanted to share that.
I think because we live abroad now, they feel that we deserted our country, and sometimes when it comes to police brutality, people don't want to touch that. It's a very it's like people just don't want to deal with police brutality, and especially like Jamaica is a country we don't have. It's a very poor country, basically. And they don't want to upset the government in America, basically.
Yes. And just
if I may interject, I think you have a very important point, and I don't want to get lost in some of the things that we're saying, because when you talk about slavery and you talk about the narrative and you talk about the telling of the story, and I don't know where it may have a place in this forum, but it needs to be heard. Not only do we need to fight it, we need to have people that look like us, act like us, have the cultural sensitivities like us to tell the story. The story is never told as effective with the sincerity, with the empathy, with the cultural nuances, if it is not told from a perspective and with a person of color. I'm not saying that you will not be successful. I'm not saying you will not be effective. But what I am saying is something that may be of sleight of hand to others is not to us. And when I'm in that room and we are arguing and we are discussing and the sensitivities of the matter is lost and it becomes an equation, we have to understand that this is a mathematical equation the way most cities look at it. Look at injury, they look at detention, injury, liability, and everything else goes out the window. So if you're detained for 5 minutes and there's very little injury and there was no probable cause or reason to stop you, then that's a nuanced case. We don't really need to be bothered with that. Not having an understanding that where that will send that individual for the rest of their lives in relations to police, trust, whether or not I want to serve on a jury or not, whether or not I want to participate in the politics and the legal system in and of itself, because I've had this repeated negative encounter and my story was discounted to a formula that equals compensation.
Thank you. I think that's an important point, both actually very, very important not to lose. Max, are you, can you hear us now? Because I'll give way and have you ask the next question if you wish. Max, I think unless I hear to the contrary, I'll just carry on if that's okay with Ms. Malcolm and Mr. Russell. One thing I wanted to share, and I meant to mention it earlier on, you both and this case sit in the 6th region of the African Union diaspora. That is the 6th region of the continent. And I've not heard anybody of the international speakers mention the fact that whilst this report can go to the UN, it can also go and should go to the Commission of the African Union. And if that has been suggested and I've missed it, I apologize profusely. But I think sitting in Kenya, when I announced the webinar to friends, they told me of a case in the 1960s in New York, where 4 Kenyans were beaten severely by New York police on the mistaken belief that they were African Americans. It makes no difference. And so I wanted to ask, in a sense, Ms. Malcolm as well, because this is a matter primarily for the families. The 2 things. One, what needs to be done to the Biden-Harris administration to call them to account for the votes they gained from the Black community? And secondly, if these collective cases, individual sufferings and collective cases, can be filed with the African Union Commission, would you be happy for that to be done as a result of this forum?
I will just note for the witnesses that the time is 10:46. We have about 5 minutes left for the hearing.
Royce, you want to go ahead?
No, Connie, this is for you. My suggestion would be that we want this case heard throughout the world.
Yeah, we want this case to be heard, like Royce said, because oftentimes, because this, like Roy said, because of the Trayvon case, people didn't know about my son case and what happened. And like I said before, this is a case that really need to be heard because everything that happened from the beginning to the end was a whole cover up. It was over 12 officers involved. And the problem with this is none of these officer has been held accountable. No transparency when it comes to Black and brown people. And we see this every day. every minute of the day when somebody is a black or brown person has been killed. And we want these officers to be held accountable. And the ones that stand around and watch and doesn't do anything, they are also complicit to what is going on. And they also need to be charged and be off the force, because you took an oath to serve and protect. And you haven't done it for the last how many years? Who have you been serving and protecting? Because it's not our people. It's not black and brown people. We are the one that being slaughtered every day, every minute, and not one officer is held accountable. All they do, again, like I said, they get promoted. They get promoted to kill a black or brown person. We hear about training. I'm tired of hearing about training. I'm sorry. I'm tired about hearing training. 2012, Ramarley got killed. Commissioner Ray Kelly said he trained the whole force. That was 2012. We're in 2021, and we still seeing this. We have to root out these bad officers, and we maybe, like Royce said, the psychological. They need to start testing them on a regular basis to see where their head is, because we have a lot of white supremacists on this police force, and we have a lot of racist people on these forces, and we have to start eliminate them out of these position. And that's the only way I feel this system going to be any better than what it is.
And I'll just interject real quick, because I know we only have a little bit of time. We are not only speaking about race in an isolated capsule. We understand that race is tied to the social economics of what happens in this world. The poorer you are and your brown skin, the worse you will get treated. You hopefully, if you rise up the social economic ladder, it might be a false leader, but the probabilities are lower that you'll get treated differently. But classism and racism is tied like the shoelaces on your fingers, and they can't be separated.
Can I just, in the very short time period left, just press you on the mechanism to press this new administration, hold them to account? How do you see that happening on this and the other cases?
A lot of black people came out to vote for Biden and Harris because we wanted changes, and we felt like he could do this. So we just got to hold him to the fire and make sure they do what they said he was going to do on the campaign where they was running to become president, stuff like that. We see, like Royce said before, with the Blas administrator, he stood with us, and I want Swiss justice, and we never seen that. But we have to hold these people accountable that beg for our vote. They come in our neighborhoods, they beg black and brown people, I'm going to make change. We really got to hold them to the fire and remind them, you said this. When you wanted our vote, you said he was going to do this, and we want you to do it.
I think we need to take a page from some other culture, the Jewish culture. They'll let you forget that the Holocaust took place. And we can't be too busy in our life, in our world, to never let them forget that that slavery and the effects and law enforcement from then to now has affected this community in a way that they can never, ever, ever understand. And that's what we stand for every day. And I think the new generation, by way of social media, by way of having protests, by way of putting pen to paper, protests used to be events that happen around certain other events. Now protests and rallies are circled around ideas and implementation of ideas and position. It's a lot broader, and it means a lot more. And so forums like this, using social media, which is the way that people listen now, we can see that from past presidents and now presidents to be in the future, to keep the pressure on and hold people accountable to their culturalism, and hold people accountable to what they said they would do.
Maybe, Mr. Russell, let me just ask the last question I've managed to get through, but thank you very much to you and Constance for keeping up this fight. I wish you guys strength. But let me just share a little bit of experience which Lennox Hines knows about South Africa when we had to go through a long period of decades of police brutality. And one of the ways that we had to deal with this thing in the most confrontational manner was actually to call the authorities. I hear, for instance, when Constance says this political leadership are making all of those promises. But for me, one of the activities and one of the things that we can call for is an ongoing truth commission, where the faces of these police are no longer dealt with in private, but the faces of brutality can be seen by the Americans, but also can be seen by the rest of the world. That, in a sense, begins to deter the other would-be offenders, because when we started with that in South Africa and said, these are the faces of brutality, very, very few people wanted to be associated with them. What do you think of a process of that nature? Because we are sitting here, we're probably in private, and many people don't see, we keep on repeating the names of the victims. But I think it's time for all of these perpetrators to be exposed.
I would tell you that all of that's, look, give me your name and address. I'll meet you there tomorrow. That is where we need to be. I think the shame campaign is the appropriate campaign, but I will tell you that we're on the cusp of that with Instagram and Facebook that captures all of these events, all these acts of misconduct, excessive force, police brutality, and it is being developed. Hashtag fire police officer X, hashtag terminate police officer Y. And I think to your point, although the countries are very different, I think to your point, maybe there should be a shirt campaign or apparel campaign where the likeness of that person is printed somewhere that says, hey, this is the face of excessive force. This is the face of police brutality. One idea can catch on fire. Connie.
Yeah, and I want to say we have done that. This is why this the sergeant, I think Royce touched on it earlier, Sergeant McLaughlin. That's why when he went up to Cold Spring to become a police officer, they put him out of there in less than 24 hours. They're like, no, we don't want you here. We know what you did in the Bronx, and we don't want you here. Within 24 hours, they have to fire him. Excellent. So, but to that too, and some things we have to really be careful what we do, because you know, South Africa and America is a little different. So you have to be careful how you put stuff out there, because then they will characterize you as being a terrorist and you want police officer to be killed. So you have to know how to frame it when you do it.
Yeah. No, what I was trying to put across in actual fact is to call on this political leadership that says they sympathize with us, because I think the difficulty we are facing, it's an intersection between the police, the political leadership, and the rest of the powerful society. And I think it's not only to call on the police, but also to call on the political system that makes it possible for this brutal police to be covered. So I think it should be an all-encompassing, and it should actually be politically driven.
Can I just add, there's nothing to stop officers being identified from a website in South Africa. And if they're sitting in New York or Washington or Maryland and their faces appear on a website as being terrorist executioner style police officers, then that can't be taken by the United States or prosecutors as such. So we only just need to use a bit of imagination, think outside of the box. And you know, there's nothing wrong when Julian Assange releases information about the CIA from anywhere else. Certainly we don't think there is. And therefore those police have to be held to account. And if we can use the Pan-African diaspora to do that, let's do it.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank everybody. This concludes the hearing. Thank you to witnesses, Mrs. Malcolm and Mr. Russell. This concludes the hearing of the case of Ramarley Graham. We will now have a short break, and hearings will resume on the hour with the case of Alberta Sproul. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.